A very good evening to you and welcome to Rwanda Television News with me, Sam Kalisa.
And I'm Fiona Mbabazi.
Commencing on the local scene, President Paul Kagame has addressed the UN meeting on international debt, architecture and liquidity. And the meeting included Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister of Jamaica Andrew Holness, as well as Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General. The Rwandan head of state pointed out that modernizing the international debt architecture should not be seen as merely a COVID-19 emergency measure.
Debt relief negotiations should be conducted with the welfare of citizens in mind and with a long-term view of development objectives, including the SDGs. Modernizing the international debt architecture should not be seen as merely a COVID emergency measure. It is a long overdue discussion that goes to the heart of the inequalities that continue to bedevil our world.
Private sector and the economic analysts have noted that the government's initiative of supporting the industrial and construction sectors get back on their feet after the economic dip due to the pandemic will help reduce the prices of commodities and costs of services because the taxes have also been slashed by 48%. Jisren Ganeza with the details.
The effect of the pandemic were so severe, it became necessary for the government to act and speed up economic recovery.
9
projects that have the requirements are already on the support list in those mentioned incentives. These projects are of the industrial sector, especially those that manufacture different equipment, including construction materials. This is all being done in order to support the local industries so that they may be able to contribute to the economic recovery. More than 1 trillion Rwandan francs is expected to be generated in this program through new investments and more than 27,000 new jobs created, which can go beyond due to the government's will when it comes to rapid economic recovery.
The construction sector employs many people in Rwanda. The private sector and economic analysts have noted that the government's initiative of supporting the industrial and construction sectors get back on their feet after the way they were affected by the economic repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic will help reduce the prices of commodities and costs of services because taxes have also been slashed by 48%.
It means that when I'm selling a house to you, I also add that money that I spent on construction, which is 25 to 30%. VAT is 18%. Now take 30% plus 18%. It is 48%. It was you to pay that percentage rate when renting the house. You would pay the rent plus 48%. It means those who need houses, either buying or renting, they will get them without being charged the other 48%.
30% of the taxes will be deducted from imported industrial raw materials and 18% on the value-added tax.
The negative effect of COVID has been, generally, the COVID pandemic has affected everyone. But for the manufacturing industries, the COVID pandemic had a negative effect mostly on the companies' operating environment because, we had lockdowns, we had a restriction of movement. All those things impacted on the company's performance. We can look into we are asking the companies were having employees on reduced number. And that reduced number means that the companies didn't operate at optimum level. So that was kind of negative that affected the industries.
The industrial sector accounts 19% of the country's GDP, which reduced by 4% in 2020.
This means a lot to the economy, actually, because the government has been investing a lot in these sectors. You can see how much the government invested in electricity, in infrastructure that would help the conducive day-to-day running of these construction and manufacturing activities. So COVID affected a number of sectors, but particularly given the role and the contribution of industry in the economic development or in the GDP per capita of this country, it's really worth it to think about supporting this sector and boost the economy of this country.
The industry and construction sector are not the only sectors that got negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and assisting them to recovery will have a far-reaching positive effect in those other sectors as well, while helping to close the country's trade deficit. Ghislaine Mugwaneza, reporting for RTV.
Thank you, Ghislaine, for that report. Now, just in an update on the reviewed measures to fight against the spread of the COVID-19. Following the ongoing assessment to contain the spread of COVID-19, the government of Rwanda has reviewed health measures. The public is reminded to remain vigilant in complying with preventive measures in order to control a coronavirus insurgency. Movements are prohibited between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. All businesses must close by 8 p.m. Movements between Kigali and other provinces and between districts of the country will continue. Movements to and from Bugesera, Nyanza and Gisagara districts shall resume. Movements are prohibited between 7 p.m. and 4 a.m. in the southern province districts of Ruhango, Nyanza, Huye, Gisagara, Nyaruguru and Nyamagabe districts. Public transport buses should not exceed 50% capacity. Physical meetings will continue, not exceeding 30% of venue capacity. COVID-19 testing is required for meetings of more than 20 people. Restaurants and cafes shall operate at 30% occupancy limit and receive clients until 8 p.m. Arriving and departing passengers at Kigali International Airport must present a negative COVID-19 PCR test taken within 72 hours prior to the departure and should comply with other health guidelines. Civil and religious weddings will continue but should not exceed 20 persons and must comply with COVID-19 preventive measures. Receptions are not permitted. Signed by Dr. Edward Ngirente, the Prime Minister of Rwanda.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that, of course, and for the highlights, because the next story also tells us how some local residents have continued to violate the COVID-19 prevention measures in place, claiming that the number of positive cases have dropped, while others claim that they were vaccinated and are therefore immune to this virus. Gabi Muvunyi has more.
As concerns in the coronavirus outbreak continue to grip our nation, a sense of false confidence has started creeping among residents in the country. This confidence has led to some of them letting down their guard in regards to implementing the measures in place to fight COVID-19. The residents expressed that due to the reduced numbers of positive cases and the recent distribution of vaccinations, they hope that the pandemic is coming to an end.
It's just reminding them that the pandemic still exists, even if the vaccine is here. The preventive guidelines should be tightened. That is one thing that should change. Even though there are less positive cases, there is still people getting infected.
Schools continue to tighten preventive measures to ensure that classes will not be cancelled again. This is mainly because they are aware of the impact it has had on them in the past.
We have student volunteers that help us in enforcing the preventive measures in school. We continue to encourage people in general to follow the guidelines and ensure that people understand that this virus is not a joke. People should constantly remind each other in this.
On a daily basis, primary and secondary students are seen holding hands and without masks on after school hours on their way home. The Mukaranje Sector Executive Secretary says that the preventive measures are being followed accordingly, and this is because the local authorities play a key role in ensuring their compliance. For the traders, we've asked them to work at a 50% capacity of their staff. For instance, if they have 10 staff, they should operate while they're 5 and have rotational shifts. Secondly, they should have several wash stations to cater for their customers. The Ministry of Health is constantly urging the public to continue the efforts in preventing the spread of COVID-19, even after being vaccinated.
Where the country stands is not bad. The number of those vaccinated is still quite low. Even though the vaccine has come, it does not mean that the virus will disappear immediately. Ever since we began the vaccination rollout, the positive cases have reduced in number and we have been able to keep it that way. We've been lucky as a nation that we haven't gone back into lockdown like other countries. But that doesn't mean that the fight against the virus is done.
The current number of cases in the country stands at 21,419 confirmed cases, 19,795 recoveries, and a death toll of 301, while 350 people have been vaccinated. Gabi Muvunyi for RTV.
Well, thank you, Gabi, for that story. I mean, it is quite sad to see that people are still violating the COVID-19 measures that have been put in place in the name of vaccines. Yet we all know that without the vaccine, with the vaccine, you can still get this disease.
Actually, this is a shame, and everyone in their capacity and where they are, of course, observing all the COVID-19 prevention guidelines is still relevant, of course, for all of us to cut down the spread of this virus. And of course, into other news, the theory of blood type dieting banks on the idea of improving health by eating the most relevant food for our bodies using blood groups and determinants. With the increase of the number of people taking up this diet, the Ministry of Health says this notion is harmful to the body and could deny a person of some nutrients. Gloria Mutesi went deep on this and has this report.
The concept of blood group dieting was a strange one, but one that is slowly catching momentum in society today. Oftentimes we hear people saying, I can't eat this because I have this blood group, or I can eat this because of my blood group. But is blood group dieting actually a myth, or is it scientific? We find out more about this today.
The only diet per se that I know is about when you're doing sports.
Humans have 4 major blood groups determined by 2 antigens, which are A and B. We spoke to some people who have tried the blood group dieting in the past, who chose to stay anonymous. They say this diet impacted them both positively and negatively, while others say they didn't know that this kind of diet existed.
I have, but it was not for blood. It was for exercise. Before I became this nice looking, I used to be very good. So, but the only diet per se that I know is about when you're doing sports. But I have never heard of blood dieting.
However, as much as the consensus among dietitians, physicians, and scientists is that these diets are unsupported by scientific evidence and that there's no clinical evidence that it improves health, nutritionists here in Rwanda say it is a contradictory theory, with some agreeing with the concept and others arguing against it.
Blood-based diet currently, it is an assumption. It is not research. It is not scientific evidence. It has not been proved. Because there is no special diet for a certain blood group, because the body, how it works, it doesn't work differently because it is particularly for a certain blood group. It works the same. It doesn't depend on a certain blood group. There is no special diet for blood group A. There is no special diet for blood group O. There is no special diet for a certain blood group. Instead, it is a matter of balanced diet. It is a matter of dietary diversity, including all the nutrient requirements.
Why we base on one's blood group is because it shows us the genetic composition of a person, and it enables us to see how people are different in terms of nutrition. For instance, people with blood group A have different nutritional needs than those people with blood group B. Hence, why we require one's blood group so that we're able to cleanly give one a diet that is suitable for them without any challenges.
kugira ngo ubashe guha buri wese gahunda y'imirire ijyanye nawe utagize ikintu ubangamira.
Dr. Christopher Kashaija from the Blood Transfusion Center at the Rwanda Biomedical Center says only when someone is diagnosed with particular diseases should they follow a specific diet as prescribed by their doctors.
Let's say you have blood group O. We take an example. When you have blood group O and we see that some evidences say that those with blood group O, they tend to have cardiovascular diseases. So when you have cardiovascular disease and you know you are at risk of having such a disease, so the diet will play a big role. So you know that cardiovascular diseases, they don't work with cholesterol. So in your food, you know you have to eat a lot of vegetables. So that's where the diet and the blood groups come together.
The Ministry of Health says they have nutrition clinics they work hand in hand with, but just for the purpose of complementing the doctor's work when they prescribe a certain diet for patients. They, however, say that those that go beyond to recommend the blood group dieting go beyond what they were licensed to do, and that investigations are underway to ascertain that.
I think all human beings are quite similar for susceptibility of any condition, any disease. So we are not different if you take the A group, B group, O group. We are not quite different that we can having a conclusion that A group can be recommended to this specific diet or B group. If you end up recommending the groups, blood groups with specific diet, you can end up with having some conditions associated with undernutrition. You can't recommend because it's not a practice that is known and approved at the Ministry of Health level. We can still investigating if it is. We accredited some clinics and they go beyond their scope of practice, which is not accredited.
The blood group diet was popularized by a naturopathic physician called Dr. Peter Dadamo in 1996. According to the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the evidence to support the effectiveness of blood type diets has not been previously assessed in the scientific literature, and no studies that showed the health effects of the ABO blood type diets were identified, and that no evidence currently exists to validate the purported health benefits of blood group dieting. Reporting for RTV News, Gloria Mutesi.
Well, thank you, Gloria, for that detailed report. Now, Gachacha court rulings that are yet to be implemented have again been cited as hindrances to the rights of some of the citizens. The point was made at the General Assembly of Parliamentarians in the Chamber of Deputies examining and who also approved a report from the Standing Committee on Unity, Human Rights and the Fight Against Genocide on the operations of the country's National Commission for Human Rights between 2019 and 2020. Sejnore with more.
In addition to examining the operations of the Commission, the report also highlights an array of human rights issues that include fighting the exploitation of minors and torture while upholding and promoting human rights. Matters such as overcrowding in the country's prisons and the problems that sometimes arise during the relocation of people to make way for developmental projects were also noted in the report. It was also pointed out that in the justice sector between 2002 and 2012, when Gachacha courts were active, more than 1.32 million cases were ruled on by the courts on issues relating to property damaged or destroyed during the 1994 genocide against Tutsis. 97.5% of those rulings were implemented, and of the 32,276 rulings that have not yet been implemented, 2,155 can be carried out because they have nothing hindering them, but they still have not.
They should give us more information on those rulings that have not yet been carried out, and yet there seems to be no reason as to why they should remain stagnant like that. This is the task they are now faced with.
The Ministry of Justice has now been asked to make sure that Gacaca court rulings that have not yet been implemented and yet have no valid reason to still be sitting there in limbo, that they be executed in no more than 6 months, and for the ministry to present to Parliament its action plan on dealing with the pending cases that do have problems in no more than 3 months. The Ministry of Local Government has also been asked to deal with the problem of people staying longer than required in district transit centres as per ministerial order and resolve the issue in the next 3 months.
It is clear that some issues that hinder human rights have not yet been resolved. For some of those issues, the committee talked to the concerned authorities and found that measures have been taken to deal with them, while others are being adopted as long-term solutions. The Standing Committee on Unity, Human Rights and Fight Against Genocide believes government institutions, the private sector and NGOs should increase their efforts to address the problems to do with human rights that were highlighted in this report.
The parliamentarians also asked the government to follow up on and present its findings on the implementation of the recommendations put forward by the National Commission for Human Rights on the issue of child labour, recommendations that were put forward in May last year. The government now has 6 months to do this.
Thank you, Serge, for that report. Now, the Rwanda Media Commission finds it necessary for relevant authorities to impose penalties against officials who do not provide information because they have violated the law on access to information that has been in place for more than 7 years now. Martina Avera has more on this report.
Journalists have for so long pointed out that there are some officials as well as agencies that refuse to provide access to information. Janvier Nshimiyumukiza is one of the journalists that faced this issue.
We wanted to do a story about the national team's coach salary at Izuba Rirashe, and the Ministry of Sports told us that the information is confidential. We knew what the access to information law commands because 1 year had passed since the law was enacted. We passed through the Ombudsman office, which ordered the ministry to provide the information. We passed through all those ways because the normal ways had failed.
On the other hand, some journalists are not decent, according to Jean Bosco Rushingabigwi.
Let's say a story is about animal rearing and the journalist wants to speak to the mayor, and when told to speak to the veterinary doctor, he refuses. For the mayor to provide the information, he will pass through the veterinary doctor, whom the journalist didn't want to speak to. Others have bad conducts and act like policemen, yet they are journalists.
In any case, the monitoring body, the RMC, finds it necessary to impose sanctions on officials who do not comply with the law, according to Emmanuel Mugisha, Executive Secretary of the Council.
In the past, the Penal Code provided penalties for those who refused to provide information, but the revised one does not impose the punishments. It looks like the access to information law that is in the Constitution is not respected, which some people hide under to violate such rights.
On the part of non-governmental organizations, it is not appropriate for both parties to keep accusing each other because they are complementary to the interests of the people. Andrew Kananga is the Executive Director of the Legal Aid Forum.
The media helped us much in this period of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it as well brought disinformation that made some people refuse to be vaccinated. People sometimes wake up and put wrong information on YouTube, which is what we want to fight against. So we don't want people to hide under the fact that some people provide wrong information and make it an excuse to violate their access to information rights. Yet some information is even useful to the public.
The UN Resident Coordinator for Rwanda, Ford Ndiaye, says the media is an important sector, expected to help the world achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, thus should not be overlooked.
It will help achieve the SDG 16 on inclusive society, peaceful society, and also important in achieving the overall SDG goals. And I can't teach you anything. You have seen here in your own country when information is not, done in an accurate way, in a way that help build cohesion and build the society, it has really damaged, the trajectory of development in many countries.
Goal 16 of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, stipulates that the public must have the right to information, and this should be done to respect the rights and freedoms of everyone. It is in this context that from Monday 29th March, journalists and public relations officers in different institutions are undergoing training to focus on the goal. The program was organized by the Legal Aid Forum in partnership with the United Nations in Rwanda.
The Military High Court on Monday began the trial of 37 former P5 and RUD Runana militia. They face charges that include the creation and joining of illegally armed groups as well as terrorist organizations. We have the details.
The defendants were arrested during a military operation by armed forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo at different times and were later extradited back to Rwanda. Others accused in this case are those arrested in the Musanze attack in Kinigi, which took place on October 4, 2019. They are charged with creating and joining an illegally armed group, engaging with foreign governments to incite war, establishing or joining a criminal organization, attempting to harm government officials, intimidation, murder, armed robbery, and also complicity in beatings that resulted in injuries. On Monday, 36 defendants were present in the courtroom. The fugitive, Sergeant Girinshruti Emmanuel Elias Karemera, is still at large and is to be tried in absentia.
And on behalf of the entire news and technical team that made it happen, thank you very much for being with us. My name is Sam Kalisa.
And I'm Fiona Mbawazi. Thank you very much for being with us. And of course, remember that COVID-19 is still here with us. So play your role well as we continue to flatten the curve in the country. Have yourselves a blessed and fruitful week ahead from me.
And of course, everyone out there.